Hello, friends. Welcome back to the While We're Waiting Hope After Child Loss podcast. I'm Jill Sullivan, your host and one of the co-founders of the While We're Waiting ministry. This is a podcast of stories of devastating loss and grief and heartbreak and struggle, and stories of hope and healing and faith and, yes, even joy. Underlying every conversation is the hope we have in Jesus Christ, which makes it possible to not just survive the loss of a child, but to live well while we're waiting to see them again in heaven one day. You can learn more about our ministry and the free bereaved parent retreats we host by visiting our website at www.whilewe'rewaiting.org. Welcome to episode number 214. I'm so pleased to introduce you to my friends Jim and Patty Polk today. We first met them in March of 2023 when they attended a While We're Waiting weekend in Arkansas, and it was truly a privilege to hear the story of their son Daniel, who died very suddenly and unexpectedly a little over 2.5 years ago. As a pastor and pastor's wife, they bring a unique perspective to our conversation, and I believe you'll be blessed by listening in. Hi, Jim and Patty. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Hey, thank you so much.
Thanks.
We're glad to be here.
Yes, excited.
Yes, I am excited too. I have been looking forward to our chat. So let's get started by giving you guys an opportunity to tell the listeners a little bit about yourselves. Tell us where you're from and what life is like for you there.
I grew up in Minnesota and went to college and then thinking I was going to be a missionary. So I went to Asbury Seminary in Kentucky and met Jim. So I had studied to become a missionary in, I don't know, I'll just say Asia, but instead I ended up in Arkansas. So
we need missionaries
anyway,
here too.
Yeah, we met in seminary, and it'll be 38 years in this month. 38 years this month. Yeah.
Wonderful.
38 good years. My name's Jim. I am a United Methodist pastor, and as Patty said, we've been married 38 years. We have 3 children. Daniel, the one we'll be focusing on, died a little over 2.5 years ago. We've got a daughter, Emily, living in Wasilla, Alaska now, and a son, Jonathan, and his wife living in Layton, Utah. So we've got kids scattered out who don't seem to want to come home. So we get to travel to see them all the time. But love our family. We have, Patty and I both, I'll just say, been lifelong Christians. We both grew up in Christian families, and that plays a lot into our story later on. But there really never was a time when we didn't know Jesus, didn't know God to whatever extent we could at that age and stage in our lives. And that becomes a huge part of, I think, our story and the before and after aspects of it. But gosh, we love to go walking. That's one of our, we've had some good healthy habits. We go walking pretty often each week, several miles, and that'll be our time to talk. We don't seem to talk so much when we're at home, but when we get in the car to go to our walking trail, from the minute we leave the house to the minute we get back, we're jabbering away, and that really strengthens that relationship. So yes. Love family, love the church. I'm currently, though I was a pastor, a regular pastor, as most people would understand it, for about 28 years. I've been working for the last 8 in our conference office in a very different kind of job, more administrative, as assistant to our bishop, which just gets me into a whole other level of church life. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. Your kids are spread out, but what wonderful places to go and visit them.
Yes. And I do want to clarify that Emily is married. That's why she is in Wasilla. She married a music minister, and he's leads music and worship at a Baptist church there in Wasilla.
But you're absolutely right, Jill. Alaska was somewhat on my bucket to visit someday. It was not that high up. It was fairly low. And now it's just kind of like we talk about it like it's our backyard. Oh, we're going to go to Alaska again. And we don't even think about it as being exotic anymore. Now, Utah, that was like right at the very top of my bucket. So I'm real glad that I've got a kid there now.
Yeah.
That'll force me to go hiking and do things there. That's desert Southwest. It's always been my favorite spot to go. So
Yeah.
we're fortunate that way.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're here today to talk specifically about your son, Daniel. I'm always curious about how parents choose their children's names. Is there a special story behind Daniel's name?
Well, I was thinking of a friend of Jim's that I liked the name Daniel, and he was a reputable guy. Daniel's middle name is James, so we needed something to go with James. And so we thought Daniel James, and we played around with some names, and there was one that, Timothy James sounds nice, but then we thought, well, someone might call him Timmy Jimmy. So we didn't want to call him that. That was just kind of a joke, but I don't know. Daniel just, it's a strong name, and
we wanted some kind of biblical name, something biblical. Emily's middle name is Grace, and Jonathan is a good biblical name.
Yeah.
I still like Timothy James for whatever reason, but Timmy Jimmy, the minute I thought that, I said, nope, I can't do that.
Can't do that.
So Daniel was a good second choice that quickly became the only choice. Now I can't even imagine him other than that.
Sure, and it sounds like his name fit him very well.
Very well.
Yeah, so tell us about him a little bit. Help us get to know Daniel.
Well, he made us parents.
Yeah, firstborn.
Yeah. He was born in 1991, December 19th. And I remember at 3 months reading him books, and he just got so excited, and he hardly had a book without him till the day he passed away. He just loved books. He read everything. And my family used to tease him, oh, Daniel, you'll read a phone book if he had to. It's just one of those. And he did very well in school, and active in the Scouts. He's got an Eagle rank, and was in the band and tried some track. Well, he did the track some. I think he had a knee injury one year, and that's why I think after that he probably pretty much stopped. And what else, Jim?
Well, what I remember,
I know more, but it's gone.
As Patty said, he really, from early on, we could tell that he had a brilliant mind. I know we're going to sound like bragging parents again, but this was so much him. He got a 34 in his ACT, was a National Merit finalist, graduated near the top of all his classes. I'm certain we have a picture of him somewhere reading the phone book. I mean, that's exactly what he did. And as I was looking through pictures of him the last week, almost every one has a book somewhere as a prop in his lap somewhere. So that made him a very inquisitive young man. And I think because of that, and this feeds into the story as well, he had a hard time focusing on zeroing in on one area of passion for his life. He was just interested in all of it, and was widely read. A young man who's able to converse with people in normal language they could understand. He liked to play pranks and jokes like anyone else. Very, very typical boy and young man growing up. And really, when I keep thinking of him, what comes to my mind is that Daniel gave us no problems. There were no issues. He didn't go down wrong paths. I'll just say it like that. He graduated with a bachelor's in economics and international trade. And while I always thought that he was rather like me, and I consider myself more a homebody than anyone, lo and behold, he decided that after graduating college, while he was single and debt-free, no children, he would just go overseas and live a while, which kind of blew me away because that's not what I would do. And that's when I began to realize, okay, Daniel really is not a miniature Jim. He is Daniel, his own person.
Sure.
He went to Vietnam, got some training there over a few months on how to teach English as kind of a second language, got placed in a university in Kanazawa, Japan, where he spent a year doing exactly that in that university setting. Didn't so much like that setting, Japan, so he came back to Vietnam. And he said these were just the most wonderful people he'd ever met. And it turned out to be where his passion lay. So it was fun seeing him kind of blossom in a way that I could not have possibly imagined. Patty, we couldn't have imagined. We keep wondering, whose genes did he get here? But he had a real passion. When the pandemic hit, he had been back in Vietnam, Da Nang, Vietnam, for about 2 years. So many things shut down in Vietnam at the time that he decided he needed to come home, was with us. And while living with us, he enrolled in a master's degree program with the University of London, where he was pursuing a master's degree in international business and determined as soon as he could to get back to Southeast Asia. It was wonderful seeing this passion that had developed in him, this focus on his future, his life unfolding. We were very excited about that. So for a lot of our story here, this wonderful person pursuing his dream, doing well, no real issues at all. Somebody we're very proud of, as we are with our other children.
Yes, I can see why. What an amazing young man.
When he was starting school, he is switching jobs because he was doing a part-time job that he knew he had to get a different job. So he had been applying, and was also getting grades on his work. And so he was kind of down because his grades kept coming back so low, and they'd write good comments on his papers. It was all online. And he couldn't figure out why. And here no job, or not hearing from his job, and then low grades. He was kind of not real cheerful. But one day I was standing at Walmart with him, and we were talking about his grades for some reason in the checkout line. And he decided to check the English grading system and found out he was doing really well instead of 60s, which here is D's. Yeah, and Daniel never made a D in his life.
Yeah.
And so that really cheered him on. And then within the day of that, he got his job, his government, a state job, and he had just gotten a good job at UAMS. This is he was training in September and started October, and school started in October. So it was all kind of starting at once. And so he was pretty elated. He did pretty well. Sure. He was excited about that.
Find out the University of London is 60 is like an A+, like a 97 to 99 in our system was just, he was on cloud 9.
Wow, that's funny.
Back in the world he was used to.
Sure. Wow. Yeah, I can imagine. He was very confused by that.
Yeah.
And relieved when he found out that he was wrong. All right, so let's kind of move on to December the 8th, 2021. That started out as just a regular Wednesday. Talk about what happened that day.
Well, regular is the best word for the entire day. It truly was a regular day. I had gone to work. Daniel by then was working from home. I got home. We had an impromptu, if I remember, cookout, cooked some hamburgers. Daniel and I were planning that evening to go to Arkadelphia, a town not about an hour south of where we live now, to a steel drum concert that we were both excited about going to.
He had not been, and I had been. So during this time, Jim's dad is living with us, which was a whole nother story. But so I stayed home with him. I said, Daniel, you've got to go to this concert. You would love it.
Yeah.
So we went the entire way to Arkadelphia. We were just talking about our day, normal conversations, told him what issues were going on in my world. He talked a little bit about his work. Then we got on to The Economist magazine, which he had started and it hooked me into. And so he was pulling out, talking about different articles he'd read. Just may sound kind of geeky now, but it was just normal conversation. Got to the campus at Arkadelphia, parked the car, walking to the venue, talking the entire way, just normal day. We got there about 15 minutes before the concert started, decided to go to the restroom first, like people do.
Sure.
Talking again straight through, normal conversation until mid-sentence. It stopped and he collapsed. And it was just that sudden, that unexpected. Turned around, he was lying on the floor, kind of trying to struggle to get up, couldn't do it. I cradled him a moment, and without needing to go into detail, in hindsight, I can see that he died at that moment. I called out for some help, and of course there were lots of people around, including a doctor who came by, who I'd been a pastor, or Patty and I had been a pastor family in Arkadelphia for 3 years before my current job. So I knew people, and the first person who came in was a doctor I knew, did CPR, ambulance and fire people were already out in the area on another job. So they were there within minutes, but it was too late. And in hindsight, I actually have been grateful to God that perhaps did not revive with his mind and what he wanted to do. There are blessings in that. I called Patty, who was at home just watching TV, and just in the moment asked her to pray, because I wasn't going to have an official announcement for another hour or so in the ER. So asked her to pray, and just let her pick it up on her end at that point.
Sure. Well, I called immediately called the kids and say, pray for Daniel. He collapsed. And I was by the couch crying out, God, keep Daniel alive, keep him alive, keep him alive. And within minutes, you say an hour, but I think it was quicker than that, he said, it's too late, Daniel's gone. And guess enter the arms of Jesus. And so I had to turn around and call the kids again. And our son, Jonathan, and his wife had been traveling around the world. They were not in Utah yet, so they were in South America somewhere. And I just felt badly calling, but I knew I had to, and I made all the calls. And meanwhile, Jim was still in Arkadelphia, and I was sitting home alone and said, what do I do? Jim's dad had no clue, because dementia had been setting in on him.
Sure.
And so I'm here calling my siblings and calling my kids again and again, just saying what happened. And I called some friends in Arkadelphia, said, please go check on Jim at the hospital. And another doctor friend was in Hot Springs, so he couldn't come. And we had some friends there who, fortunately, they had 2 houses and they were in Arkadelphia at that time. So I'm so glad that these friends were able to go meet him at the hospital, because Jim was totally by himself.
Sure.
At my end, of course, the paramedics and others came and were working on Daniel, tried to revive him, took him to the hospital. I actually left for the hospital and got there before them. before they arrived. And so the people in the ER weren't even sure what I was talking about, or maybe they were. They probably heard who was coming.
Right.
We got there. As Patty said, a close friend came. It just seemed like an angel coming that moment. When the doctor came in, and when we know that Daniel had in fact died, I definitely had to sit down and I could feel the shock coming in.
Sure.
When we were able to go back, my friend and I, to see Daniel, it was just short minutes later before the local organ donation company rightly called, Aurora. They rightly called they have to do that in that moment.
Yeah.
But that was when the nurse said he had a directive to donate his organs. I didn't know that.
Right.
And so I'm thinking in real time, oh, the concert is probably now about halfway through what was supposed to be going on. And here I am in this surreal position talking about organ donation. And it was just like in real time, two different things were playing out. That I'm grateful for the shock that was clearly there protecting me to try to handle both things. But I do remember clearly that night, just a part of my brain constantly thinking, well, what's going on? The program must be over about now, and here I am doing this. A surreal world, and just wasn't ready to be able to process it at that time. So normal day that became abnormal in a heartbeat, and that was the beginning point for what we had to start dealing with.
Yeah. That's so hard for me to understand as somebody who lost my daughter to cancer, and we walked that journey out with her, and we could see that without a miracle, the direction we were heading. And so we had time to prepare as well as you could prepare for something like that. I cannot imagine being a normal day, having a normal conversation all the way on the drive to Arkadelphia, walking into the bathroom, and everything changes in just a moment, just a second. And then for you, Patty, to be at home, just, thinking everything's fine, and then getting that phone call is just hard for me to comprehend. And like you said, surreal is the only possible word that I could think of, that could even come close. And it's not even close, I'm sure, to describing what you were experiencing. When you were at the retreat, one of the things you said was the next few days seemed cruel. Talk about that.
So it probably wasn't just the next few days, it was every second,
Sure.
in some way. So backing up a bit, I think part of it was the world suddenly seemed very fragile to me. And even as a pastor, that wasn't supposed to be the case. But I think the cruel, when I use that word, which thankfully I have stopped using, it got out of my lexicon, and I don't associate cruel with the death anymore. But he did die on the 8th of December. He had been born on the 19th, so this 11 days before his birthday, and of course, just a couple weeks or so before Christmas, which meant that Amazon Prime and all these other days had happened. We had ordered all sorts of gifts for our kids to come in. And I remember distinctly the next day realizing with dread that a few gifts that we had been excited about for his birthday were bound to be coming any moment, including some things for Christmas gifts. And sure enough, that very day, the first packages, I don't remember exactly what they were, but over the next several days, a few birthday cards came to him, maybe some packages and so on that had been, and every one of them was just a little knife kind of stabbing into us, saying the world's going on, everything's just as it's supposed to be, and yet it's not. And so each day, we had ordered for him a telescope, a nice telescope, thinking this is something he'll love.
Yeah.
And I think that package came 2, maybe 3 days at most later.
Actually, I have to say something. It came the 8th or the day before, because I remember trying to make sure he didn't see it when he walked out,
Oh,
because it
wow.
was in the garage and I wanted
Yeah.
to make sure. But there were other gifts that came, is what he's referring to, I think.
Yeah.
So many things that were playing into this, kind of wanted to say life is going on, you ought to be happy, it's his birthday, it's Christmas. And that too was surreal,
Mm.
not fitting in. So yeah, there were all those external things, and then kind of as a pastor, for me at least, the cruelty part said this isn't making sense with what I preach, with what I teach, with what I read. It wasn't the equation that I subconsciously, I guess, I bought into and never would have acknowledged out loud. But it was this equation. It was not, if you're a good Christian, things will go well. I know that's not it. I never preached that. But it was, we are faithful Christians. We've given our lives to Jesus. We've given our lives to a Savior. We know God is real. We are sinners, and we've been forgiven and touched by grace. We're being changed. We are trying to live now the life of maturing disciples of Christ. That's one side of that equation. The other side is that I didn't really say out loud, but I clearly was believing, is that life will go well. And indeed,
Right.
it had. It didn't mean that trying times hadn't come. There had been plenty, but we got through them and could see God's grace and God's hand, and we had the right holy and healthy habits. If we're following this Christian pattern, then all will work for good to those who love Christ Jesus. And in this case, it's like, no, that equation doesn't work. And a fragile world became more fragile.
Mm.
So yeah, that's, I think, in the moment, that was the cruel part.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see that. Something like this makes you really examine your faith, doesn't it?
Very much
I,
so.
I think we do have these ideas and preconceived thoughts of how our lives should go, especially when we are faithful followers of the Lord. And when things don't go that way, it can really shake our foundation. And it sounds like you were grappling with some of those things.
Not so much questioning our faith,
Yeah.
but challenging it,
Hmm.
and having to
Challenging.
re-examine some things. Pretty quickly on, after Daniel's death, several people either sent to us or brought to us various devotion books.
Yeah.
And on my part, at least, I quickly put them aside. After reading several, I realized the pattern. Most of them were a single page, maybe a page and a half long. They laid out a problem that we might be facing, or an issue or an emotion, and they solved it by the end of that page.
Hmm.
And it's like, after reading about a week, and I started reading ahead a little bit, I said, they're all solving these problems by the end of that daily devotion. I don't want any part of it. This
Yeah.
doesn't feel right. I began reading a lot of books that helped me, but the challenges to my faith, or the questions that began coming, never rocked my faith. I don't believe it rocked Patty's faith.
Mhm.
That we had so many things already settled.
Yeah.
And in that sense, my goodness, we were so fortunate. But there were many things I realized that I might have been speaking in platitudes more than I knew, and that maybe I need to start nuancing some things or acknowledging some of the uncertainty and the questions that can naturally come to faithful Christians.
Yes. Yes. Well, and that kind of leads into my next question. As a pastor, one of your roles through the years has been to walk with grieving families. And one of the things you said at the retreat was, this didn't make me question my theology, but it did make me question how I talked about faith. Flesh that out a little bit.
I'll be fleshing that out, Jill, the
Uh-huh.
rest of my career,
Sure.
maybe my life.
Yeah.
So with hindsight and having a chance to look back over some of my sermons that I've kept and so on, I felt like I was, number one, I was talking about things in many cases that I, with this hindsight, didn't know a lot about.
Yeah.
True grief being one of those. I had by that point conducted, I mean, probably a couple of hundred funerals. They had become, as they are for many pastors, my favorite service to do. And if you ask pastors, many times I almost always get head nods about that. Those are the moments when we're closest to our faith, to the very core of our faith, to the things that matter, when we get to tell stories about the person who's died. You know, if you're walking through the valley of the shadow of death, you're by definition awfully close to a high point. And death, the high point of faith and resurrection, of grace, of forgiveness, of heaven, it's all right there. But I realized I didn't understand the valley. I didn't understand the shadow of death. I also, and I'm still learning even more, the walking through the valley, which is, of course, what all of us are doing. Much of what I was doing, Jill, was based on things that I could study on paper, thought I knew, and then realized that no, I didn't know much about that at all.
Yeah.
And that was easy to start with when it came to death of a child, realizing, okay, I've got to throw out an awful lot and start over. But it also became true for me in the way I talked about faith, and in particular the things I left out of that story, which I've come to believe we do pretty often in our church life. I might be rambling now, but one of the books I read called Learning to Walk in the Dark, because sometimes God shows up at night, it was honestly for me one of the most profound books, because I actually like hiking at night. I learned that in one of my previous pastoral assignments. But in the book, it talked about solar theology and lunar theology, solar Christianity and lunar Christianity. Solar Christianity is kind of like how we look at the sun. Every day the sun looks pretty much the same. It's, you know, we love the blue sky days. Our theology is let's pray God will see us through to the end. Let's love God. Solar theology in the midst of death talks about the joys of heaven and how glad we should be that our child is in heaven. And I wasn't feeling those things. Lunar theology is an acknowledgement that this other great light is constantly changing. Every night it's either growing stronger or dimmer. And there are sometimes every cycle when it doesn't even exist. Yeah. It's just not in the sky at all. And the author said, and it just resonated with me, that's how, in reality, even as a strong, faithful Christian, that's a more accurate story of my faith. There are days when I am on that mountaintop and there's nothing but joy, and life is good. And oh my goodness, it's not just a blue sky, but there's a rainbow in it and everything else.
Yeah.
And then there are days when oh my gosh, the rain clouds are coming, and then it's on top of us. There are days when things just feel dark and God feels silent. I realize we don't talk about that, and yet that's where so many people are.
Mm.
So as I think about, as a pastor, even as a pastor, perhaps especially as a pastor and pastor's wife, people started looking at us to see how we're going to respond.
Sure.
Or it was kind of like the unwritten question to me that may or may not have been real, but I felt it was, is their faith going to hold? Do they really believe this? Are they going to get mad at God? Are they going to question? I was used to being on a pedestal at that point, and so I made a decision early on. I acknowledged that this was an event that was going to change me. I just didn't know how or how much, but I was going to allow people to walk with me, and I was going to be open about it, because I think that's perhaps what a pastor can do best, just model. And if I was going to fall apart, I'd fall apart. If I was going to have questions about how I had talked about certain aspects of faith, if I was going to add a little more nuance or put a little gray into things that seemed so black and white a week earlier, I was just going to do it. I wasn't going to be that person that only talks about a child or death and just annoys everybody in the process. But I wasn't going to hide it. And I think that's going to become an important part of my pastoral ministry when I finally retire from this and am given a little church somewhere to serve. Acknowledging that we live in a at times dark, painful, fragile world with a God who is ever present, always good, and stronger than us. So I think I can say that now with a great deal more empathy. I'll let Patty talk a minute. I'll compose myself.
Yeah. As a pastor's wife, Patty, I'm sure you felt some of that pressure too.
Well, I'm not a deep thinker like Jim is, but no, no, he has done very well there. It's been hard.
Yeah.
I was never mad at God and never doubted him. But sometimes I said, God, why are you not speaking? Why? What's going on? And sometimes I wonder if I've yet heard him speak about, well, I still ask why.
Sure.
I think I'll always do that. And I don't know. I just get so, sometimes just miss him so bad. I said, why? Why, God? Why? Anyway, and people have commented to me about how strong I've been, so that's good. And it's kind of okay. Right now, I'm not the typical pastor's wife because Jim's not preaching.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of people where we live now don't know Daniel. And so it's not like I bring it up all the time. I mean, people know that he died, but they didn't know him.
Right.
People who live around me. I mean,
Yeah.
there's plenty of people know him, but so it's not like I bring it up every day and need to display it. But I certainly don't want to forget him. And it'll come up sometimes. And I'm trying to be strong. And I just I want to be a witness. I remember I wrote a little journal and I got to get back into it. But just some of my first thoughts and first things I wrote was, I want to glorify God. And I'm trying. But there's a verse I always like. Well, I learned after a passage, Psalm 56, 8-10. You keep track of all my sorrows. You have collected all my tears in your bottle. You have recorded each one in your book. And My enemies will retreat when I call to you for help. This I know, God is on my side.
Mm.
Yeah, that's verse 9.
Yeah.
God is on my side. And I just have to remember that, even though sometimes I feel like he's silent, but we still have a great God, and God I want to honor and glorify. And we got to let our light shine in this dark world. It's not a dark night, but I mean, not like Jim said, but we do need to be a bright light in the dark world.
This concludes the first half of my conversation with Jim and Patty Polk. Be sure to come back next week to hear how their son Daniel's sudden and unexpected death led them to completely re-examine their faith, and while they found themselves forever changed, their faith had only deepened. Thanks again for listening, and I look forward to sharing the rest of our chat with you next Wednesday.